Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, August 19th, 2020. Time for yet another show. We are in the midst, as you know, of the Democratic National Convention. Many of you watching even got me to turn things on last night as I saw the comments about people enjoying the distanced and virtual format for the roll call of the states. That was actually very well received innovation last night, forced, of course, by the necessity of the COVID-19 pandemic, from which we still suffer, and we have not gotten any closer, I don't think, to getting out from underneath this thing. But everything's having to be improvised this year for the convention. I wasn't certain whether I thought it was a great thing that we were going first with the Democratic Party convention and then the Republicans. That's sort of, that's kind of the way it is. Wasn't any kind of conscious decision. I think there's a protocol to this, but at any rate, and I'm not even actually sure offhand exactly what it is. It seems to be the case fairly often, though. But I wasn't sure who I would, if I could choose, who would go first, who would try to deal with this format first. And I think this is probably where we would have settled on this. It's an awfully difficult thing to pull off, but apparently, according to the reactions I was able to monitor on Twitter, I mean, obviously, we're talking about following chiefly Democrats and Democrat adjacent folks anyway on Twitter. So you're going to get a biased sampling, but there's no shortage of people who make their way into my feed or are intentionally placed in my feed who would have every reason to criticize at the same time. But at any rate, this was really well received, and I always like the roll call of the states because it's procedure, and you know I go in for that. And I like the nuts and bolts of the votes actually being cast in order to bestow the nomination. But this was interesting. It usually, it's not interesting per se, not visually interesting necessarily, to watch the roll call of the states, because even though there are a diverse group of people casting the votes from the convention floor, and it's kind of interesting to see all the delegates, sometimes who appear in the shot when they go to each state delegation. It's also interesting to see where they're seated and how large the delegation is and who they pick to do the announcement. But this was much more interesting because it gave everybody the opportunity to actually be on the ground in their home state, usually in some iconic place or with some iconic backdrop in order to deliver the votes. So it was very interesting to watch, and it was actually kind of nice and moving in a way to see where they chose to place themselves, who they chose to put on camera, and also gave them a lot of flexibility in choosing who would make their announcement. So there were some really interesting surprises. I think the big hit of the night, just for the fun and camp value of it, must have been Rhode Island, which I guess decided what they had there. Were they out on the beach? I'm now forgetting what the background actually was. I think so. And the big hit of the night was having a plate of calamari. That would have been really interesting to have a ventriloquist have the plate of calamari cast the votes for Rhode Island. But plate of calamari side by side there visually in the field. It was one of the more bizarre things you'd ever see. I guess whoever cooked the calamari was standing there holding the plate with a mask on. That was another interesting visual element, the masking going on. It was really quite, both at the same time, bizarre and endearing. I mean, what other state would come out there with no other state would come out there with a plate of calamari, and it got, I bet the Google hits on searching, first, what the hell was that on that plate? Calamari, if you don't know what it is when you see it, it's not instantly recognizable as appetizing food, but if you love it, If you like calamari, you'll love it. And it's fun to see. Oh, look at this. So my Skype is not up and ready here, and it's not receiving Greg's call. I cannot figure out, once again, what that is, but I'll call Greg. He's excited about the calamari, so I will give him a call in just a second. We'll have to chalk that up as a missed call. I hope, I didn't get a chance to do the Skype test call that I usually do to warm up the system. See, okay, there we go. All right, as long as we're connected, Greg, that's good news. I know you're excited about the calamari.
Yum.
And I spent the last few minutes before the broadcast on some other details. Usually, these days, I like to try to do a Skype test call just to warm up the system and remind the computer. This is a program that you're supposed to make work when prompted. And thankfully, I'm glad we have your call first, because also exciting on the menu today, not like calamari, but the metaphorical menu, Denise Oliver Velez, at your suggestion, Greg, thank you very much, will join us later on in the program. I guess towards the end of your segment, we'll give her a call and bring her in to talk about, well, one of the big items on the agenda for tonight's Wednesday night presentation at the convention. Kamala Harris gets her nomination speech today, and there's some interesting background that you suggested might be wise for us to add to our knowledge base and vocabulary for understanding a significant portion of what generates the excitement, some of the excitement behind Kamala Harris's candidacy, but a very specific slice of it too. So anyway, let's dive into everything else, and you can talk about the calamari if you like at this point.
I'm absolutely going to. I mean,
it's first on your list, I see.
We were at Providence together, right, for Netroots Nation?
Yes, I did make it to Providence.
And so we had breakfast in the morning. David and I always do on the rare occasions we actually get together in real life. But I promise you, I did have calamari at dinner at least one of those times, because the Rhode Island calamari is really good.
What is it that they do?
But the actual Rhode Island culture dish is the quahog. I mean, it's clams.
Yeah.
So it's pretty funny that they actually had a rule. They passed a law making calamari the official Rhode Island appetizer.
All right.
It's the state appetizer, and so you had these guys. And they were on the beach. Yeah, we have a pretty good product. It's always fresh. It's pretty much the best sauce we serve. It's a great flavor. Where else would you go but the beach in Rhode Island for a restaurant serving calamari? So they had a political hack for the Democrats, presenting the votes in Rhode Island. And the chef was holding the plate of calamari. Now, the chef isn't even sure he's going to vote for Biden. He doesn't care. He's there to say calamari's good and you should eat it. And, the big guy, and he's wearing a mask, and the whole thing came across as, look, I got calamari here. You're going to eat it. You're going to like it. And if you don't eat it, we're going to have trouble, and it ain't going to be good trouble. And it was just fantastic. It was a great presentation.
It really was. I don't know who that was. I mean, I assume it was
it's a chef.
The elected official who actually cast the votes. I don't even know. I'm not up on my Rhode Island politics. Everybody in Rhode Island knows that was... But the chef, I think, stole the show without saying a word. How he's going to get that calamari in behind a mask, I guess he's going to have to... Yeah,
it's a state party chairman. His name is Joe McNamara. Okay. He was on sandy Oakland Beach in Warwick. And the chef is from Cranston, which is a suburb, close enough to actually get to Boston pretty easy.
Okay.
But, it's all about roadies, so it was great. And then the other...
there were some other states
were also fantastic. Probably my second favorite after that. The sentimental favorite was Wyoming, where Matthew Shepard's parents presented, but without saying who they were, but they just were. But perhaps my second favorite was North Carolina. Because they had an activist in North Carolina. Everybody in North Carolina knows Kazi Watkins.
I guess
so. She gets up there, and she says, look, I've been doing this for a long time, so let me just be plain. Black people, especially black women, because she's a 69-year-old Charlotte nurse and black woman, are the backbone of this party, and if we don't show up, Democrats don't get elected.
Yeah, there you go.
So just do it, basically, is what she said. And then the guy from Ohio, I'm a union guy, and every time Donald Trump opens his mouth, he lies.
Yeah, it was really great.
Ohio. I mean, it was great. It was fantastic. And then you
Ohio.
saw, 57 of these, I guess, including the territories, American Samoa and so on and so forth. It was just fantastic. They should do that
really
every
good.
time
and
lose
there was a
the
lot of
stupid
call
stuff
for
that they used to do.
There was a lot of call for that. The most common comment I saw was, we should do it this way every year. And it went fast, too, which I didn't expect to be the case, since they were going to give people, more chance to do. I mean, they had a chance to talk about calamari, and yet still it flowed.
Right. So you had a guy from Maine, a man of color, standing in front of a beautiful roadside house here. Right. And he says, my American dream, you're looking at it, a 25-acre organic farm on a lake, a roadside farm stand, a B&B. My husband and I, he says, aren't corporate tycoons. We just want to make an honest living and feed our community. I mean, it's great stuff, because you got a view of every state and just a tiny little flavor, including the calamari, what these states are like.
It was genuinely
it was America,
uplifting.
and it was a diverse, diffuse America. Puerto Rico did their here's how many votes we have in Spanish.
Yep.
It was just wonderful. And, there are parts of this that basically, I called it the digital decency convention, because, the whole thing is, Aaron Astor had a nice little tweet thingy about that this morning, which I included just toward the bottom there.
Okay.
But what's the convention about? The convention's designed to rally and unite the party, advance a theme. And the theme was a combination of Big Tent. We got Republicans, we got Democrats, we got AOC, we got John Kasich. They're all under the same tent, and we're all decent people. Yes. Unlike that other guy, and unlike that other guy's party.
That certainly, by comparison, yes, there was a little tension over the last couple of days about the Republicans making appearances, but
so minor
still,
when you step back and look at the whole big picture.
Yeah, I didn't hear anybody saying we must hang these people. No, that's good. So it went. The call of the states was terrific. Lots of interest in doing it that way all the time.
Also,
lot of people saying it felt like traveling,
right? Because you had to pull all of that together. And normally, what happens is that Delaware would sneak in just at the right time to put them over the top, but instead they put them at the end because I think that it was just too technically difficult to coordinate that with the 50 different, some live, some taped situations.
It's hard to go, back and forth in between. So a good settlement on that one. A lot of people felt like they had, traveled for the first time since the COVID-19 lockdowns began. They felt like, or got some great travel ideas of where they wanted to go. Great choices in presentation. There's a very nice summation of it. The New York Times actually wrote up everything by state. Who were those people? And at the very least, gives you the name so you can look them up. In some cases, notes about something special that they did.
Do you have it handy? What did they say about North Carolina?
North Carolina. Let's see. North Carolina. Scrolling down here. It's going to take me a little while. It's a long list. There we are. Naming Ms. Watkins and who she is, and has a excerpt from her speech. I have been doing this for a long time, so let me be plain. You remember that, a great opening line, and she just got right to it. Black people, especially black women, are the backbone of the party, and if we don't show up, Democrats don't get elected. I'm done at that point. But she goes on, and I'm putting on my mask, and we're going to every corner in North Carolina to help organize because we need to make sure everybody shows up for Joe Biden. He will show up for us.
Right. It was like, let's get real. We got work to do. And yes, absolutely. So Aaron Astor goes on to point out, he's a historian, by the way, the obvious difference this year is the virtual nature of the convention. That posed technological challenges. But in many ways, Democrats were prepared for those. We've all become used to the Zoom-style home-based meeting and testimonial. So good production crews can make it all work. And in a lot of ways, I think they pulled it together better last night than they did the first night. But, they're all practicing. Ava Longoria was great as host. Michelle, of course, knocked it out of the ballpark. But there were flat parts to each 2-hour segment, which is not surprising. The first night kind of felt like a Jerry Lewis telethon. And the second night really was more like it was a digital convention, and I think younger folks probably had an easier time with it than some of the old fart pundits I would see watching this. I hate this. I don't like it. Why don't we do it just get off my lawn stuff.
I guess
it's not geared to you. You're not the audience.
I thought it was great, and it really gave a nice new feel to it. And I bet they will start doing things like that as well. And it's always interesting, and they sometimes will introduce little elements like that the best they can inside the convention hall, traditional conventions. People wear, the Hawaii delegation in the leis, and some of the other Pacific Island territories doing the same, and people wearing, giant Texan hats, what have you. But there's nothing quite like this one.
Right. So, part of the deal then is to try to make sure that you have an overarching theme. And when you bring in Cindy McCain to make the case that John McCain was real good buddies with Joe Biden, and they were decent people in a way that, the current crop of White House occupants are not decent people, you can look at that a lot of different ways. Are you, as a Politico Playbook put it, you looking at the old white senator deal, the old nostalgia, or are you talking about, something different? And again, what I'm looking at is, look, none of that matters. These are decent people. That comes across. Jill Biden, in her segment, certainly reinforced that part of it. It was kind of cool doing it in a closed classroom, because the whole reason this convention exists the way it does is because of the pandemic. And they did talk about that. They're going to need to talk about that more. That's Biden's job, I think, on Thursday. And today, you have to have Kamala Harris actually present herself to the country for the first time in a completely different way. A lot of people just aren't that familiar with her, and they're only going to know stereotypes. And so, it's important that they do that. So that's the convention. And I think that that was one of the three big stories yesterday. The other two are the Senate Intel report that came out, and, of course, the Postmaster General in retreat.
Yes, maybe. Or as I saw.
Oh, it's definitely a big story. I mean, it doesn't mean that it's over.
No.
But the fact that political pressure made him do this and made Ron Johnson hastily throw together a Friday Senate hearing so he could go on there to a friendly territory before he did Monday with the House is all due to political pressure. The fact that he announced that, okay, I don't want the appearance of looking like we're mucking with things, so from now on we're not going to do anything bad, is political pressure. Yes, there needs to be rollbacks. We have to make sure. And it's not the boxes. Nobody cares about how many boxes there are, the little, blue R2-D2 things. That's not the issue. The issue is the sorting machines and the overtime. Because as many people have pointed out, and again, I think we touched about this on Monday, but it's really interesting watching the conservative pushback to this. And the conservative pushback to this is, look, the post office can handle the volume. They have 1 billion pieces of mail right before Christmas. They do just fine. Okay. So it's a fake issue. Well, no, it's not a fake issue, but yes, they can handle the volume. So it's a little bit less worrisome in terms of what's actually going to happen. And that's important because the Democratic voters need to feel like their vote counts, it matters, that it's not going to be stolen. And so those what appear to be small, incomplete victories are in fact victories and should be taken as such.
Yeah, my concern is, as somebody put it today, the pushback politically means that the Postmaster General has to announce that my overt program of obstruction and voter suppression must now become a covert program.
Well, that's
that
what
is still a possibility.
For.
Yeah, that's true.
And also, there's two aspects of it. Dave Diane had a nice piece, D-Day, back in the old days on Daily Kos, had a great piece about the origins of all of this. And don't forget, it's a twofer for them. Because, again, this is part of the conservative pushback. You guys, you Democrats are making up this whole issue about stealing votes. It's really about trying to privatize the post office and stealing, a public service. So let's get this right.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, okay, so it's a twofer. They're really, and I said to Dave Diane, so which one do you really think it is? And he said, well, why not both?
Oh. Okay.
Well, but it is, and so this was a coordinated plan. It all goes back to Steve Mnuchin threatening post office money until Trump got his people in there. What did he want his people in there for? That was before the pandemic. So it wasn't all about suppressing the vote. It was about trying to privatize the place. But once you got your own people, then you can just throw this on there because it's all part of the same thing. So, there are individual states that are taking a very different approach. One state is going to print ballots in green so that it's easy to identify which ones are the ballots that have to get handled properly. Post office was threatening to raise the price. I think that's probably on hold now too, because that's part of this, rollback stuff. That's good. There's a lot more that needs to be done. You got to watch them like a hawk. It's distrust but verify. But again, the political pressure matters. It was the major story for days. They were getting clobbered by this. They know it. That's why they had to react the way they did.
Yeah.
So what I don't go by is LOL, nothing matters. It mattered greatly.
It was a great, it was certainly a great public-facing victory. I have no trust whatsoever, of course, in DeJoy, and no reason to believe that his statement is enforceable, but it's nice that it was made. They could have said, get bent. We're not doing anything different.
Well, yeah, but here's another way of looking at it, which may make you feel a little better. Pretend it's not DeJoy. Pretend it's a similar character. Okay? Pretend it's Gordon Sondland. Because what they do is they pick these billionaires who want to play government agent. They want to do cosplay. Okay. But when you stick them in the hot seat, they fold like a cheap card table.
Oh, okay. Well, that's easy to understand. I see the president himself do that all the time.
Yeah. That's the part where the pressure matters. Gordon Sondland, he's a threatening figure who's going to run everything and run the Ukraine story so that it's going to be, and then you put him on the hot seat, and all of a sudden, I had nothing to do with it. I just did what I was told. I don't know. I don't know.
That works.
That's the joy.
Point. Yeah. Okay. I'll take that. That actually is that is somewhat hopeful. It is possible that all of these people are terrible and paper tigers. And okay, good. I'm looking forward to it.
The third-rate bureaucrats who do what they told. It's one thing to run a business and be a billionaire because you can tell everybody what to do. And then it's another thing to try to do it in this setting where all of a sudden you find that, there really are rules. And when you do it in public, it just doesn't look so good.
Okay. Yes. All right. I'll take it. That is good news. Thank you. I appreciate it.
And then the other story is the Senate Intel piece.
Yeah.
Which is important for a number of reasons. Nobody's sat down and read the whole 1,000 page report. But just like most people don't watch conventions, they just read the headlines the next day.
Yes.
They don't read these reports, but they read the headlines the next day. And the New York Times, for example, in their print edition, has that as front page story, not across the entire, paper, but it's a big story in the choice position over there on the, right-handed column for the New York Times. I actually took a picture of it today, so let me find it for you and then give it to you.
Okay.
There it is. And so you can see Senate panel ties Russian officials to Trump's aides. GOP-led committee echoes Mueller's findings on election tampering. It's a big story. It's going to get a lot of coverage. And the point is it was signed off by GOP senators, which now raises the obvious question. If you knew this, how did you vote against asking for more witnesses? And how did you vote to not convict?
Yes.
The Senate doesn't impeach, but you do convict. How did the senators who were on this committee, because maybe you could argue the rest of the senators didn't know, but how could the senators on this committee do what they did? That's going to be a discussion between now and when some of these guys are up for re-election.
Yeah, I know. It was a preordained conclusion. They just said, well, whatever happens, we know the political dangers of actually convicting this guy. We can't have that happen. Don't let it happen and ignore everything. Stick your fingers in your ears and refuse to convict regardless of what you hear. And amazingly, I mean, this will hurt. I don't know whether it displaces any of them from office, but you need to vote this way despite what you believe to be the case. And that's going to be tough to swallow. I mean, they'll change their minds and they'll spend their campaigns swearing they didn't believe this stuff, but this is your report.
Well, why didn't you ask for witnesses to find out? There's no avoiding that question.
That and of course you did release this report. It is a Republican-run committee. The fact that this report got released at all is astonishing, and it stands by itself. The fact that it's here means that Republicans believed it and voted for it, and now I'm going to read it.
And even though,
says,
and the funny thing is, now that Richard Burr's been demoted because of his insider trading scandal, the lead committee Republican is Marco Rubio, the emptiest of empty suits with the emptiest of empty responses. You see, if you read the report, it says no collusion. That's what he said.
Yeah, that's why they made
it says
1,000
nothing
pages.
like that, and that's just simply not going to fly.
Well, it says
they can try that. Good
you
luck.
Didn't read yet. You know, they will try it. It's remarkable that that's even a possibility. But I guess with 1,000 pages, you can do
that's it.
Anything.
The tank is empty. They got nothing else.
Yeah. Well, they don't. I don't know if they need anything else. We've made our
we'll
decision.
Find out in November, but I suggest they do because they're going to lose a majority over this. And let's take a look at the glimpse at the future here. I was having a discussion with my friend Ben Yellen over this on Twitter, who's more cynical about this than I am. But let's just pretend that what I said is what happens in regard to this is all a question of Biden's win and the size of it. Let's say Biden wins and he takes the Senate Democrat. Mm-hmm. All right.
Okay.
Now you got people with the gavel who can do stuff even after the election. Like, let's go further into this. Like, let's pull these people, and there is no executive privilege being argued by the White House, by the Biden administration. Let's see what's going on here. That's a big effing deal.
That's true. Well, we can make it one, certainly. No executive privilege and no worries about OLC memos about who you can and can't arrest.
Well, the Republicans will do a counter now. They're in the minority. Don't you know what that means? You're going to find out what that means. It means squat. They can't do nothing.
Yeah. Well, we just hope that this isn't one of those let's not look backwards situations.
Too much pressure.
Yeah, well, if you can pressure the post office out of their program, maybe you can pressure a new Democratic administration and Democratic Senate into another one. Okay, we'll be right back after this next break, and there's more. As it turns out, there's a couple of big stories, so we'll get a chance to cover some of those after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin's still with us, recapping some of the major stories, the biggest stories. What a day to try to jam all of this stuff in. I do want to make note of one comment, as you reminded me, that back to the Rhode Island issue. It was, in fact, Oakland Beach. I have a comment here from John Godin, who tweets in that was Oakland Beach, one of the only remaining places where a middle-class person can own a home on the seashore. Probably a good point. You know how those things tend to go for millions and millions these days.
I bet the seafood is very good.
Yes, and as a matter of fact, here's a note just now that the chef is from Iggy's, a famous restaurant in Rhode Island, right on the ocean there. The beach where they cast the votes is right behind the restaurant. So, yeah, you want to not only partake of the calamari, but get right on the same spot just for a little nostalgic throwback at some point. When we were allowed to travel again, Iggy's is the place.
Right, or as they say in Maine, if your feet don't get wet when the tide comes in, it's not fresh enough.
All right. Yeah, we'll take it. So, okay, a nice plug for the place. That's good. People probably wondered, all right, so this calamari is so good, prove it. Well, now you can go and find out.
Meanwhile, we don't have a ton of polling because there has to be the convention. Then you need post-convention polling to see what kind of bump. So we're going to get a ton of that, over the weekend. But Windsor Man points out kind of a funny observation here. Joe Biden leads Trump among women, minorities, college-educated whites, and former members of the Trump administration.
It's a good cross-sampling. Okay.
A good cross-sampling, and that just leads us to the op-ed that was in, I think, the Washington Post from one of the DHS guys at Homeland Security. I saw firsthand how dangerous Trump is for America, a fellow named Miles Taylor, who did some interviews. I think he did some video shots, but he also did this particular op-ed. Miles Taylor served at the Department of Homeland Security from 2017 to 2019, including as chief of staff, and talks about the fact that, everything you thought Trump was doing, he was doing, including directing help to red states and away from blue states, which is a big deal. Now, while the Democratic Party is putting their best foot forward during the convention, don't forget the Republican Party is doing what they do. For example, Laura Loomer is now the Congresswoman elect at least for the Republican primary, one that she's going to go on to lose. But she's a nutcase in Florida, Florida 21, and I think she's going to lose that district pretty badly. It's a district Clinton won by 20. Jake Sherman points out in 2016. Lois Frankel was unopposed by Republicans in 2018, and in 2016, Frankel won by 28 points. But the Bulwark actually has if you didn't know who Laura Loomer was, she has a whole story here. She basically was banned by everybody who knows her, Twitter, Facebook. They won't let her on anymore because she's so bad. And Trump had like 4 or 5 tweets praising her this morning. Yeah,
she's a lunatic, racist, more so than QAnon, but
she wanted to start a American version of Uber and Lyft because there's too many Muslim drivers and she can't stand them.
You may possibly remember, if you really don't know who she is, as the person when she was banned from Twitter who she chained herself to the front
handcuffed
door of the whatever. And was it their building? I don't even know what she chained or handcuffed.
It was to the front door or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was the most.
I'll pee on myself if I have to, she said.
Yeah, so that was it. And I think there's a video clip of them out there trying to say that. So, what the hell do you want? I want my Twitter account. This is about
right. Then we have in North Carolina 11, which I think was Mark, what's his name, the new chief of staff, Mark Meadows' old district.
Can't keep track.
And Heath Schuler before that, Democrat. North Carolina House candidate is under fire for posts some call sympathetic to white nationalists. A fellow named Madison Cawthorner seems to be lying about everything. You may recall he scrubbed a tweet where he was visiting Hitler's,
Eagle's Nest,
and just how magnificent the whole thing was.
Yeah, I didn't realize.
Apparently, he only follows 88 people on Twitter. I don't want to jump to too many conclusions here.
There are more.
But there's a ton of them.
You could go to 89.
This story from the Charlotte Observer. So I'm just saying the other party, as somebody pointed out, while the Democrats were doing this wonderful roll call with diversity from all over the country, the Republicans are going to have somebody in every state in a supermarket without a mask screaming at people and then getting carried out. I mean, that's going to be the roll call for,
I guess so.
For renominating Trump. So that's the background.
Thrown out of restaurants. Republicans do. All right. Well,
now here's a CNN poll.
Yes.
Most Americans embarrassed by U.S. response to coronavirus. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans say the U.S. response to the coronavirus makes them feel embarrassed. 62% of the public says President Donald Trump could be doing more to fight the outbreak. Disapproval of Trump's handling of the outbreak at a new high of 58%. And Americans are angry. 8 in 10 say they're at least somewhat angry about the way things are going in the country, including an astonishing 51% who say they are very angry. CNN has asked this question in polling periodically since 2008, and the previous share who were very angry was 35. Now it's 51. A narrow majority, 52%, say they are not comfortable returning to their regular routines right now. That's important because one of the big stories right now are all the colleges that are closing. University of North Carolina, Notre Dame, you open up, you get sick, you go home, you take the virus back with you. A lot of them are starting to move online. We have sports being canceled. We have colleges being canceled. And again, if you're going to do political analysis and say, well, setting the pandemic aside, this is what usually happens, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Well, they do it wrong a lot. And,
Right.
in some cases, we're dying.
Okay, and one last piece here, and this is a bit of a technical piece, but I think it's worth watching. Now, Mark Krikorian, who is a Laura Loomer type nutcase on immigration, writes, Kamala Harris's plan is to unilaterally legalize pretty much all illegal aliens. And Republicans' gift in the last year's defense bill makes litigating against Senator Harris's proposals, if implemented, next to impossible. And David Beer, who's at Cato and who looks at immigration, but who's actually a reasonable kind of guy, says, you actually made a good point for once. It's amazing that Trump signed a bill affirming, quote, the importance of the parole in place authority, PIP. Parole was always an unassailable legal foundation for liberating immigrants, but now it's even more bulletproof. And House put forward the provision, and the Senate agreed the importance of the parole in place authority, the Secretary of Homeland Security, is reaffirmed. So great work by everybody involved.
Okay.
So should Biden and Harris actually wind up being president and vice president, it puts them in a strong position to do something about a lot of the discrimination that's been taking place and reversing it and using parole status in order to fix some of the problems.
Okay.
Just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yeah. Why not? I mean, okay, great. I'm glad for a little change of pace here.
Yeah.
We'll take it. Oh, you know what? Here's a good question, actually. Karen asking here. Has there been enough time to poll the post office issue? Have we discussed post office poll? It feels like.
Oh, yeah. Well, what we do know is that 91% of the public likes the post office, and they're upset about it. Yeah, there've been some polling, but not to the degree that we really want. I can go dig that up, but screwing with the post office is not a popular thing to do. It's like screwing with Social Security.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing anything specific, based
well,
on what's
there
your
was
reaction
one
to now,
that said that people are going to be much less likely. And this actually was a rural poll. So let's just do this for a second. And it was done by the Niskanen Center, and it just came out yesterday.
All right.
All right. And let me see if I can just dig that in. I have it in the pundit roundup now that I'm remembering. Because Rachel Bitecofer and a Republican pollster got together and looked at this and says, let's just look at Pennsylvania, and we'll take a group of rural districts in Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Okay. And despite a party breakdown of 56% Republicans, 34% Democrats in the survey, reflecting the rural Pennsylvania congressional district, 57% of those likely 2020 voters report they'd be less likely to support a candidate who reduced the budget for the U.S. Postal Service or privatize the agency. And that includes 43% of Republicans. So what the Republicans are trying to do is not a popular thing.
Okay. Well, that I imagine was the case. Yeah, just
right. So if you're looking at rural voters, they hate what's happening here. Now, they still go on to say that the Republicans in this rural Pennsylvania survey are less likely to vote by mail, and Democrats are more likely to vote by mail. Mm-hmm. Okay. And 51% of rural voters report being concerned about changes at the post office. Partisanship exerts strong influence. 63% of Republicans report they're not concerned, and 71% of Democrats say they are. Okay. Yeah. And just as a control, 62% of these voters approve of President Trump's handling of the pandemic. So you can't claim that this is a Democratic-leaning group of people here.
Maybe we should mail them some news about what he's doing about the pandemic. But
maybe. But if that's your baseline, where you would expect 60% support no matter what you do, it turns out they hate what the president is doing on the post office. That's about the only polling I've seen so far that really gets into the specifics.
All right. There's no is it Abby's objecting to this?
It's Wednesday, so we should be getting the waste disposal engineer.
Yes. Okay.
To take care of the garbage. He's outside making sure he's welcome.
Oh, he's not there yet? She's just like, you're late?
He's at another house, so she's waiting. He comes with cookies, so she'll be fine when he gets here.
All right, well, good. All right, no problem. registering.
So let's call Denise.
Okay, we can do that. Let's see. I'll press some buttons. I think she's ready for this. All right, we'll see. Yeah, if it works, it works. All right, let's see. If I say add to call, is it going to dial her up? Let's see.
Right. So while we're waiting, let me just read this David Corn tweet. Donald Trump says, Senate Intelligence Panel found no evidence of collusion. There was no evidence the Trump campaign conspired with the Russian government, says the Daily Caller. And David Corn said, actually, the report found your campaign manager was secretly in league with a Russian intelligence officer who may have been tied to the Kremlin's attack on the election, and that Trump Jr. tried to collude with Moscow, and you likely lied to Mueller. So, nice try.
Yeah. Hey, that's we should see whether they get away with that. All right, let me try this again here and hit these buttons. I feel like there should be some ringy-dingy noises happening here, and there's not. So let's see.
Okay. Well, do not try this at home. We're professionals here.
Don't try it anywhere, really, if you don't have to. Okay. I mean, okay. We bring up her call here. All right. Well,
you'll let me know when things work.
Yes.
I got one other piece to read here, which I think is sort of interesting and also a little bit of a tangent that we normally don't cover.
Yeah.
But I think it's important. I did mention it, that the University of North Carolina had to close down because of the coronavirus mess.
Yes.
All right. And so here's a guy named Brett Devereaux, ancient historian specializing in the Roman economy and the military.
Oh.
And says, people are talking about this, and all the criticism is perfectly valid, but we also need to talk about why university administration probably had no choice. And let's talk about university finances and the four horsemen of the academic apocalypse.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
The fourth horseman we're already familiar with. That's pestilence.
Okay. Yes, right. That's the one we mean.
Okay, so we don't have to really go into that one. But the first horseman is declining public funding. And most people don't realize, but public funding on higher education, like for state schools and stuff,
yes,
it's been collapsing for a decade now. And it's way different than they're just covering for inflation.
Yeah. Now, actually, would be a good jumping off point. I think we may actually have Denise with us that didn't make any of the noises that indicate.
Yay! Well, Denise knows a lot about the academics too.
Denise, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, we've got you. Okay, very good. It's a tricky
so great
thing.
having you on.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for putting up with our our fumbling of the technology here, but we're doing our best.
Let me just finish up this segment, and then we'll go right to you. But he says, the best professors, and you know something about being a professor, the best professors can still only teach so many students at once. So if you want to teach more students, you need more instructors, which means you need to pay them, which means costs go up. So the bottom line here is the universities are having the problem of pestilence plus price, and they're happening at the same time, and it's a mess, and they really haven't figured out what to do. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate your standing by. I guess you've probably got some experience with being called by the radio folks interviewing you, and just sort of you answer the phone and something else is going on, and you just know, okay, I'll just wait my turn here. Sorry about that. Okay, but yeah, now this was something Greg had mentioned the other day. Made a very specific suggestion. Although again, I'll leave the platform of what we do, wide open. So don't feel compelled to go in any particular direction. But when we were speaking of the nomination story and the addition of Kamala Harris to the Democratic ticket, there were of course. The reaction among the press, the reaction among the right, which of course dove directly into any stereotype they could latch onto. But it struck Greg, I don't know, maybe you want to explain it a little bit differently, Greg, but that there was, he was specifically in mind of your January piece, I believe, the cultural competency for reporters. Brought up a very interesting issue. I don't think I had seen that piece until he mentioned it. I went back and took a look at it. I thought perhaps...
Well, it was a great piece, and I read it and I said, you know what? Instead of me mansplaining and whitesplaining the intricate importance of a Kamala Harris and the reaction to it, why don't we have somebody who's actually culturally competent and able to do that? And that's why I thought of you.
Well, thank you. Cultural competency in terms of Kamala and her membership in the Divine Nine. Let's start there, which is a collection of, it's how the traditional and national Black sororities and fraternities are described, because there are 9 of them. And I took issue, a while back, even going back as far as Hillary, with people not understanding the power of those organizations in the Black community, and the Black community votes for Democrats. I mean, as far back, I don't even remember the date that 2015, I wrote a piece that if my mom was alive, she'd be voting for Hillary, because Hillary had showed up in D.C. for the 100th anniversary of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and there were 20,000 Black women there, and they were shouting, "Run, Hillary, run!" You know, and she was very comfortable in that environment. Dorothy Height, who, you know, had been the president of the Deltas, people were just thrilled. And I talked about it, and people are like, "What? Who cares? You know, what does that mean?" So I'm just kind of backtracking.
Well, I can understand it. I guess it's still a complete mystery to a lot of people, and even people who might have some experience, maybe in their own college background. What, fraternities, sororities? That just wasn't such an important part of.
Let me just throw an easy one in there. I mean, because if you don't get it, you don't get it. But Kamala Harris is chosen. That's great. I'm giving $19.08.
Thank you.
Yes.
That's what I donated, $19.08, because Alpha Kappa Alpha, the first sorority, was founded at Howard University in 1908. And it's not just at Howard, because it's international. So a number of us, and I'm not an AKA, but a number of us donated to send a message to the campaign that we're out here. You know, I'm a daughter of the Divine Nine, because my mom was a Delta and my dad was a Kappa. So we're here, but people aren't understanding. And when Kamala announced her run for the presidency, there was a reporter from the Washington Post who covered her announcement at Howard, and she reported it as, her name was Chelsea James, and she reported that there were women, she said, let me read this quote. Washington Post journalist Chelsea James, who was covering the event, didn't seem to know anything about the Divine Nine or Howard. She tweeted about members of her Howard sorority who began screeching, and wrote, she didn't expect to hear that here. Well, all hell broke loose on social media, because the screeching she described was actually AKAs using their campus call, which is, it's called Skiwi. And I remember when I was at Howard, when you came out on campus, you'd hear across the yard the sound of skiwi, skiwi, and you knew that AKAs were out. And then you'd hear whoop, whoop, and that would be the Deltas. And every single one of the sororities and frats has a sort of sound identifier. But describing it as screeching insulted a whole lot of people.
Yes.
So there's that. And then earlier than that, if you remember when in Baltimore, there were a lot of events going on in Baltimore, and a reporter for CNN was covering a town hall about, you know, the Black community response to violence in Baltimore. And she was in the town hall.
Mm-hmm.
I hear a dog.
Yes.
Oh, that's Abby. She's part of the show.
Oh, okay, because my dogs will hear that and start barking.
That'll be great.
So Erin Burnett, the CNN anchor,
Yes.
reported that in the town hall where the people were discussing the violence of the Crips and the Bloods, they panned the camera and she referred to all these women who were immaculately dressed in their blue hats and suits and whatever as members of the gang. And these were members of Zeta Phi Beta, who are a powerhouse in Baltimore politics.
Look at all those green and pink gang members.
Wow.
Yeah, right. So
That's
it was
AKA colors.
it was all hell broke loose in Baltimore about that. But again, it goes back to cultural competency. If you are going to be a reporter for either local or national publications and you're assigned to cover things that are black, it's called do your homework first.
Yeah.
And, there's no need to have apologies if you had better representation. And I'm not saying that reporters have to be black, but they need to be competent. I report on Puerto Rico almost every day on Daily Kos, and I'm not Puerto Rican, but I damn sure do my homework.
Yeah. Denise, I want to bring up one other thing before we hit the hour and the break, and that is another seemingly simple thing when you explain it, but is head scratching when you see it. And that is, Kamala Harris, I don't know. People just aren't really excited about that. Are you reading the right people? Why don't you try looking at Black Twitter? Why don't you talk to some AKA folks and see how excited they are? Why don't you talk to the K-Hive? Why don't you explain what the K-Hive is?
Okay. Are you going to take your break and then yet, come back?
In a few minutes.
9:57.
We got a couple minutes.
K-Hive is a collection of people, and let's not. People always want to run around and go, well, the head honcho of this group or whatever. K-Hive is a group of people who support Kamala Harris, and taken from the concept of the Bay Hive, which are supporters or fans of Beyonce. Quite some time ago, a person on Black Twitter named Bianca came up with the idea for this K-Hive. And then other people joined in. It became a hashtag. There's no chief honcho. We are not controlled by some amorphous organization. I'm a member of K-Hive. Not everybody in K-Hive is black. There are Latinos in K-Hive. There are white K-Hivers. But we are strong supporters of Kamala Harris, and we supported her for the presidency. And because we saw the level of misogynoir, meaning antagonism against somebody who is both female and black, and hence you get misogyny plus noir, French.
Right. Okay.
Black sexism against black women. We decided that if people were not going to defend against this, that we would do it. And so there is a woman named Reese who has Black Women Views. There are just a whole long host of people who decided to go back and correct a lot of the trashy stuff that was being put on social media. And I mean, Kamala was under attack not only from the right, but there were elements of what I call the progressive left that were coming after her with misinformation. So people in the K-Hive made it their business to counteract that, because we weren't even getting the kind of support from official punditry, the folks that you see on MSNBC and CNN pontificating day in and day out about politics. And so we took them to task as well and have done the research. And as is said on Black Twitter, we come with receipts, meaning facts rather than memes and fiction.
All right. Well, it's understandable. It's I guess always the first assumption for whatever reason, and whenever they see anything happening in an organized fashion anywhere in politics, I guess they assume there must be a leader and a hierarchy, and or they must be paid in some way. But I mean, even just competency with social media, I think, tells you sometimes just regular people get together and do things because they're interested in it. I don't know why that is so difficult to decipher, but, a lot of mistakes being made in cultural competency. I can see some great illustrations of some rather egregious ones here so far. Let's see, we are on the cusp of getting ready for our break, so I guess before we dive into anything else, I can, first of all, I guess we can give Greg a chance to sign out. Greg, if you're still with us.
Stick around. I'll stay till Denise.
Terrific. Excellent. All right, so we'll take a 1-minute break or so after the crescendo of our music and be back for another segment. Denise, we've got another hour here, and I don't know if you certainly don't have to be responsible for filling it, but we're just throwing the doors open for you for any subject, any direction you'd like to take it from this point on.
No, I would love to talk more about the Divine Nine.
We'll do that after this. Okay, so we are on our break, and they don't hear us, but I can turn the music down a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. Let's go into that.
Do that.
That was
important.
I spent about an hour and a half at the end of the convention just watching videos on YouTube. I said, all right, I got to hear the ski-wee. I got to hear somebody do it. And that just led to like an hour of exploration to all the calls that I could find and just all the really just interesting rituals, I guess, that went around. I watched about 15 videos of the Deltas singing to one another at their weddings. This was terrific.
Yes.
One of the most amazing things I've ever seen.
It amazes me that so few people outside of the Black community even have a clue. But if you're a politiciin, you should get a clue. Nancy Pelosi has a clue. She meets with Deltas, out in the Bay Area, and meets with other people from the sororities. Michelle Obama obviously has a clue. She was invited to be, I shouldn't even be talking about this right now, right?
Well,
This is the break.
We'll just jump right back into it because we're out of the break now, but we do this fairly frequently. There's no worries. Don't worry about the production value of this program. It should never be a concern. We can just start right in. We mentioned, we were just talking, everybody who wasn't with us during the break, about, where we wanted to go with the rest of the segment. And we'll throw it open to Denise to do that. But she just mentioned, I want to talk about the Divine Nine some more. I mentioned that I had spent a long time last night doing my own homework and really found some fascinating aspects to this culture that I bet probably if you're not involved in Black fraternities and sororities, maybe your first good opportunity to become exposed to some of this was I found at their weddings. This was really something I was not expecting. I went onto YouTube just to see if I could find videos where I could hear these calls, the ski-wee and the ooh from the Deltas, and just what does that sound like? Why would this reporter make that mistake? I've got the basic understanding of just they don't know what it is, but what does it sound like? What would they have heard? And in particular, I was struck by the Delta Sigma Theta's tradition, I guess. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about it, as while you're telling us the more important aspects of the Divine Nine. But at their weddings, this is apparently a very important part of things. But there's a particular song that they sang, which I found it was a great song just by itself, but it was just moving to see all the women standing in a circle around the bride and singing this song. And a couple of the videos made specific mention of the fact that, I mean, this is an incredibly important moment, I guess, for the bride, that they were quieting everybody down. She's been waiting for this for years, and there's this one moment where all these sisters are singing to her, and I just found it really incredible, and very different experience.
What I would suggest people do, since more people tend to be familiar with Beyonce, right, is to look at her homecoming video, which is a celebration of HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, homecoming and football games, right? And in which the sororities and fraternities take a big part. And Beyonce's entire video, which was award-winning and all of that, pays tribute to the kind of presence of the sororities and the frats. I mean, and this is what I think is fascinating, is that this is not something new. The first, on Daily Kos, when I have talked about this, people come in and go, oh, sororities and fraternities, they're just a bunch of drunk partiers, and they think Animal House, the movie. And they don't understand the political significance historically of having black organizational structure. We sort of know, I mean, politicians know that they better go to black churches, and show up for things. And they know that the church plays a major role in black political activity. It's why we have Souls to the Polls. But those politicians who haven't done their homework don't understand that one of the other major organizations historically in our community are the graduate chapters of all of these sororities and fraternities. And so when they come in and say to me, oh, Animal House, I go, is that how you view Martin Luther King? And they go, no, and I start pointing out some historical names that they may know who were members of these fraternities and sororities. So I'll give you some examples. W.B. Du Bois, one of the founders of the NAACP, black intellectual, was an alpha, and Thurgood Marshall was too, and Martin Luther King Jr. was. A. Philip Randolph, and founder of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and one of the people that brought together the March on Washington, as well as Congressman John Lewis, may he rest in peace. It was a Phi Beta Sigma. And in the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, you had poet Langston Hughes, also the Reverend Jesse Jackson. And in the Kappas, my dad was a Kappa, the membership included Arturo Schomburg. If you know anything about Black history, he was the Black Puerto Rican who founded the Schomburg Library in New York. And, for pundits, Charles Blow is a Kappa. Okay. And if you switch over to the sororities, Barbara Jordan, who we all know because of the role that she played in Nixon's demise, was a Delta. And Dorothy Height, head of the National Council of Negro Women, also a Delta. The writer and anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston. And for the AKAs, they can claim Toni Morrison. So, and then I have people who say, well, yeah, but that's just bougie, corporatist, blah, blah, blah. You know that rhetoric, right? And I say, familiar. Oh, really? How about Huey P. Newton, founder of the Black Panther Party, who was an iota, along with Bobby Rush. So no, I'm sorry.
No.
Huey was. I think he was a Sigma. But I'm naming this list because the association of the word sororities and frats with just party activity, and I'm not going to say that sororities and frats that are part of the Divine Nine don't party, because they do, undergrad. But the graduate divisions are very, very active in politics.
It's it's a distinct difference, I think. Well, there's not much in the way of graduate branch activity for what I guess people think of when you mention they think of Animal House, when they think of fraternities and sororities, and totally different sort of organization, just not often a big part of a graduate's life outside of the black fraternity and sorority structure. It's a different sort of organization. I don't think people really understand that, and maybe that's just that's a product of the way we still segregate our society. You just don't get into the personal life unless somebody brings you there. But yeah, I mean, totally different from. I'm sure that we could go.
Here's another way to look at it. If you
okay.
want, if you want to go completely white bread, right, and traditional, people don't dismiss Skull and Bones and say, "Well, that's nothing," and that doesn't have any effect on your life later.
That's true.
It depends what school, it depends what organization, but a lot of these ties are actually pretty profound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very different from, as you were naming the various prominent black men and women who had these ties. I suppose if somebody wanted to push back on it, they would say, well, I'm aware of many, accomplished white politicians or figures in society who were likewise members of their fraternities or sororities, but it didn't really, I don't know, it doesn't become a big part of the rest of their life. George W. Bush, well, he was a deek. Well, okay, we happen to know that that's the case, but what did it mean for him after graduation? He left that behind, presumably, for most of the rest of his life. But
maybe not, because you don't know who knows who and what dinner
true.
You had and all that sort of stuff. It's just so integrated into who you are and what you do. It's just you don't talk about it.
It just seemed to me, and maybe Denise, maybe I have it wrong too. This is entirely possible. But it seems to me that there's just much more of an emphasis in the black fraternities and sororities on actual, uplift and aims
service.
For life versus
and service.
Yes.
And in every city that has a significant black population, the graduate or alumni chapters of these national and international organizations are doing the work, whether it's after school training, stuff to do with food, stuff to do with education. And I mean, my parents were active until the point of their deaths and engaged in, we have been, as black people, we have been kept out of, locked out of so many elements of the greater society. We've just gone on and done it ourselves. And it isn't just a matter of political action out in the streets. You have to have networks that are developed. You have to have charities that you develop, actions that you take in communities, and responsible members of black communities, many of them, if they got a chance to go to college, are still engaged in those activities through the work. It's not just the NAACP and CORE and SNCC and all the organizations that people refer to when they talk about social organization in the black community. They tend to overlook they're intersecting. And then as Democrats, we should be very aware. I mean, I don't see enough coverage of things that there goes my dog in the background.
No
the
problem.
Congressional Black Caucus. I do a Twitter roundup twice a week and include the CBC and what CBC folks are doing. And by the way, I was really glad to see a lot of them featured at the convention. But when I go to look for things, I take a look to see who's in office, and the first thing that comes to mind when I see Congresswoman so and so in her red suit, I'm like, oh, she a Delta because of the colors, and I took a look to see who were the current Deltas in office right now in the 116th Congress. Joyce Beatty, Yvette Clarke, Marcia Fudge, who's actually the 21st national president of the Deltas, Brenda Lawrence, and newcomer Lucy McBath, you know. And switch over to the AKAs. You got Alma Adams, Bonnie Coleman, of course, Kamala Harris, but Sheila Jackson Lee in Texas, and Eddie Bernice Johnson, Terry Sewell. And another newcomer who I enjoy following is Lauren Underwood, Frederica Wilson. So you begin to take a look at who are folks who not only are active in this quote-unquote social organization, because I don't really want to call it a social organization, but are actually currently elected and functioning in Congress and also in the Senate because of Kamala. So those intersections are really important because we're talking about expanding the number of Democrats that get elected, you know. So, and we also know we have to take back the Senate, and we should be drawing upon those strengths in those communities when we're talking about getting out more of the black vote and have a better understanding of how things work. So when people are designing a campaign, if they haven't figured out how to do outreach to groups like the AKAs and like the Deltas, they're, you know, to me, that's failed political organization. It's just bad politics.
But it becomes obvious as you're running down the list, too, that I guess another big difference in the way people might otherwise view Greek organizations is that I don't know what kind of answer I would get, but I doubt very much whether outside of these those affiliated with black fraternities and sororities, if you asked them whether they had any affiliation during their college days, but more specifically whether they really felt like it was that organization that had a hand in getting them to where they are today, I don't know that you'd get a yes answer from. Well,
but that's really the thing, right? It's the post-college
difference.
Network as well. And also I'm reminded, and Denise is an expert on this, not me, but I came across this paper when I was trying to do my homework, getting ready for this, because she's right, you got to do your homework. This one's called Higher Education as a Means of Communal Uplift, the Educational Philosophy of W.E.B. Du Bois. The point being, there's a whole lot more to our fraternities and sororities in this setting, in this context, than, frat parties.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, there's a, I'm going to probably say it wrong, the Journal of Negro Education writes just reams of scholarly articles on improving education, the role of HBCUs in the development of the black middle class, the role of HBCUs in political engagement, and then, of course, you have to understand the cultural context of HBCUs. You have to look at, I'm actually working on a piece right now looking at the postal workers strike and the attack on the post office. And I don't think people even understand that post office employees were foundational in the development of the black middle class. That was one of that, and of course, Pullman car porters. And I know myself, having had a grandfather who was a postal worker and the other grandfather was a Pullman car porter. Yeah. But there's a connection in postal workers. A lot of black postal workers are college graduates. Think about that. You know, that because upward mobility in terms of social class was segregated and black people were kept out of the benefits of the GI Bill in particular, many people with college degrees went into the post office because there's a quote, a saying in the black community, there's always work at the post office. And it paid good money, had health coverage, it had benefits, it had pensions. So a huge majority of African Americans who were able to buy a home, and that's foundational in middle class development, worked for the post office. They went to HBCUs, they had college degrees, and they were also members of these frats and sororities. It's all interconnected. And again, it gives you a deeper understanding if you don't just say this is peripheral, this is some nonsense, I don't understand all this pink and green stuff. But if you look at Black Twitter, you begin to understand how key this is. And my feeling is, as Democrats, who depend on always the black vote, the black vote is foundational. We may only be 13% of the population of the United States, but in certain states we're key and make the difference in whether or not a Democrat gets elected. So it would serve well for people who are outsiders to our culture to begin to develop some kind of perspective on just who we are. It's not like we're hidden. You can sit on, you did it, you said you went to YouTube and found out about Delta serenading folks at their wedding. So it's there. The question is, why aren't people being more curious, and not just curious, but why aren't people putting in the footwork or doing the homework and not just expecting black folks to show up and then go away until the next election? It behooves everyone, no matter what color they are, if they're a journalist or they're a political pundit or they're a pollster, because if you don't even know who to go poll, then I have a problem with your polling.
Everyone will.
Yeah, sure. Everybody would agree with that. I have to finish up my segment, but, this is a great segue into just reminding people again, if you didn't see it, look at the roll call of states and look at North Carolina and, look at what the message was there. And that is, I'm here and I don't have a lot of time, so let me just get right to the point. Do your work and get out there and do what you need to do. And I'm telling you this because I'm a woman and I'm a black woman. I know what I'm talking about, and let's just do it.
Mm-hmm.
Do your homework.
Mm-hmm. And that homework isn't getting done. I'm really happy, Greg, that you were on it right away. I mean, you were like, cultural competency. Hello, Denise. Talk about these AKAs. But still too many aren't. And I'm kind of upset that even when black folks become on-air pundits, on CNN and on MSNBC and whatever, that often I think that they feel constrained to fit in to where the show is going and not bring up this connection. It doesn't get explored enough. I mean, how many times do you sit and watch MSNBC and see Michael Moore, who becomes the symbol for, I don't know, white worker, automobile industry, something or something.
All right.
But when you have a black pundit, you don't automatically think, Charles Blow and his affiliation to the Kappas.
No, it doesn't. Well, it doesn't come up. or it could. I mean, I guess that's your point. Is there a role there for black punditry to help everybody make that connection, or is it too much to ask for them to put themselves out?
As a white guy, I got to point out it's part of our job to go find out. It's not their job to feed it to us.
No, and I imagine it would be rather difficult to make the decision if you're surrounded by people that you think would have reason to be hostile to your raising the subject. You want to hold on to your good job, just like anybody would.
Nor do I expect Tucker Carlson to do his homework. So I got to say thank you to Denise for all of this. It's always enlightening interacting with you, speaking with you. That higher education is a means of communal uplift happened to be a article from the Journal of Negro Education that I came across. And, I try to learn. I try not to white-splain things I don't truly understand. I like to have experts on instead. And so thanks so much for stopping by this morning. I got to go. You could stay. You could do whatever you need to do. But I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll do some of this again.
All right. Very good.
Thank you for having me. And I hope that people will explore some of the articles. I guess it's time for me to write yet another one of those pieces.
Well, we'd appreciate seeing it. But thank you. Thanks, Greg. We'll talk with you tomorrow as well. And thanks for the suggestion. Denise, the door is still open for you if there's further exploration. If you want to continue on, just because Greg's going doesn't mean you have to. But on the other hand, I know you're busy, and I don't want to keep you longer than you're willing to go. But
no, I mean, I would love to, but the problem is that I think that even people listening need to go back and do a little reading, and maybe people will have questions in the future and I can come back and answer them. But I think that people have to just take a little time out and go and do their homework and get a better understanding of this. And it's not like the information's not out there. As Greg brought up, I've written about this, several times on Daily Kos. So they can go find it.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll have some suggestions from it. I'll start where I started, and certainly if you have any others that you'd like to toss out at some point, either just off the air, email, anything you think of. I should have brought this up. I'd be happy to pass that on. I really appreciate your time and speaking to us about it. Let's do that and give people a chance to digest it a little bit and pose their questions. And if they start rolling in. Or even if they don't, we'll have you back for some more when you're good and ready.
Thank you. I look forward to it.
Excellent.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Take care, Denise. All right. Well, we'll speak with her again in the future. Let me know, by the way, everybody, if you have got those questions, if they've sparked any interest for you that you think maybe she's the expert you want to turn to and have her answer the questions directly. Let me know. Send it via Twitter. Try the KITM hashtag. We got our own hashtag, not a hive, but it's. I guess it is. Maybe we could call it one too. I don't know. If maybe there's no room for us to join in that particular movement, but not to co-opt the hive idea. Probably not a great idea for us to co-opt that one. What do you think? All right. Well, let me know whether by Twitter or via email or I don't know what other ways you could do. I suppose you could try and look me up and use the mail system, but you never know when that'll arrive. Thanks again for your suggestion, Greg. And you know what? Maybe I'll point you to a couple of the videos that I happen to see on YouTube. Although honestly, really, the best thing to do would just be to explore on your own and see where it leads you. I don't think there's anything any more revealing about what I would have happened upon on YouTube than what you're likely to find in your own exploration. And I guess the algorithms will help lead you to wherever you find the greatest interest in finding intersectionality with these groups. But I found it really interesting. Just generally speaking, totally different. And I began to have the imaginary conversation in my head with people who maybe were members of, I guess, more, or I was going to borrow Greg's terminology for it, the more white bread of the fraternities and sororities out there. And it's just a different kind of organization. You know what I should have brought up when Greg was here, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit tomorrow. I think maybe the best illustration of our own initial exposure to at least some portion of this was, and I think Greg probably already knows where we're going, at the Chicago, the last of the yearly Coast conventions before we became Netroots Nation, at the Chicago convention when we ran into the Black Shriners groups there. Not something I had been exposed to before, and I haven't been exposed to Shriners, period, except for, occasionally seeing them in parades in the tiny little cars or something crazy like that, or in the movies. But that there was this entire additional outside, or I guess even supplemental, maybe not outside, but supplemental organization that was not entirely different, but not entirely the same either. So if you're familiar with, fraternities and sororities and you have that Animal House view of things, it might pay off to think of it more like the Shriners, in the sense that, this is an actual adult activity, not crazy kids just having a good time while they're in college. I mean, that's sort of the entree into the system. But this is not to say that the men and women involved in these organizations as graduates, as alumni, and as adults are just indulging the same tastes and interests that they very well may have as undergraduates, certainly, but with an eye towards what this would mean for the rest of their life. It's just a totally different experience, and you don't have to necessarily have been in attendance at a historically black college or university to witness it, to understand it. But if you were like me and went to a very historically white college, it may be new to you. And it's been a fascinating exploration. I recommend it to you. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, they're easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, it's a tough transition off of that. Lots to catch up on here. I don't know which direction we ought to go in next, but maybe we'll talk a little bit about one of the other major stories that Greg had brought up at the beginning of the show. It's really incredible what we haven't yet been able to talk about. And I guess I'm going to have to spend a good portion of the balance of the week on what happened with this Senate Intel report. And I mean, it'll take days to digest this thing. The headlines out of it, how would you describe it? I would say more just like, I don't know what. I guess it was really, the biggest story that came out of it for me was what Greg pointed out, that there are Republican senators who know, understand, and agree that, pretty much the story as told by the committee Democrats, in part by Mueller's investigation, and also in part by a lot of the amateur sleuthing that goes on the internet and in social media, basically getting the story of the I guess there's a part of the Trump-Russia story that they got very, very right, and a part of the Trump-Russia story that I guess we still can't establish as having been right. And that's the thin reed to which Trump and Trump defenders will be clinging, saying no collusion, no collusion. It's not the case that the report states explicitly that there's no collusion, or even that they found no collusion per se, but that I guess it seems to me like they're hinting at the possibility that it wasn't so much collusion as Russia and Putin calling shots and taking those shots, and the Trump campaign happily accepting the outcome of those shots. Sometimes being explicitly alerted ahead of time to the shots as they're being called, but not so much collusion in the sense of Trump asking for specific execution and Putin delivering. I don't think the relationship worked that way, maybe. There's no reason to believe that there's a partnership of equals as between Trump and Putin. And I don't think anybody who, even people who believed very deeply in the, that there was clear evidence of Trump and Russia collusion, ever believed that they were equal partners. It was always that Putin was the puppet master and Trump the puppet. So, I mean, that's not inconsistent with where people have been, but it's been real interesting to watch that grow out of it. And of course, there are other views, and I haven't read through the report myself, and I've seen just these excerpts, and it's difficult to tell whether it's coming from the main body of the report or whether there's minority views that would represent statements that the Democratic members of the committee would be willing to sign on to, but that Republicans were not. But certainly the minority conclusions seem to be that, well, though there was no hard evidence produced of any kind of, let's say, written agreement between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, or between Putin and Trump attesting to their desire to collude, all of the evidence was there, if not the proof, I guess is one way of putting it here. All signs point to collusion in fact, though there is missing any sort of admission or written document setting down that collusion was the aim. As they said in the I guess probably in the minority views, this is what collusion looks like. And a million stories growing out of this. There's the Bloomberg headline, for instance, which puts it as plainly as you'll ever see it put in a mainstream media headline, which was, we got to get this pop-up out of the way. Let me go back to the pocket thing. Putin ordered 2016 Democratic hack. That's all there is to it. Republican-led Senate panel says, just in case you were worried about who was saying it. Is this Stephen Dennis's piece? Do I have that right? Yes, it is. Okay. Got to go back to the pocket view of things. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the 2016 hacking of Democratic Party accounts and the release of emails intended to harm Hillary Clinton's campaign. The Senate Intelligence Committee, the whole thing, Republicans included, concluded in the final report of its Russia probe, which also found no evidence that President Donald Trump colluded with Moscow. And I don't know whether I would agree with the construction of the sentence, although, maybe that's the way they put it in the terms of the report. I don't know if they got their terminology right. It's been a while since we've been over the concepts, but I know we've discussed on the program way back the difference between proof and evidence. I would say it found no proof that President Donald Trump colluded with Moscow, or that candidate Donald Trump colluded with Moscow. But it did, I think, find evidence. I don't know if that's a fair way of putting it, but maybe I'm just using them as terms of art here, right? Evidence is that which tends to prove that something happened. Proof is something you can build with evidence solid enough to get beyond a reasonable doubt. Evidence is just that, those pieces of information which, taken together or separately, tend to lead you to this conclusion. When the conclusion is strong enough, it becomes proof. But anyway, we'll continue on with the article here. Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the Russian effort to hack computer networks and accounts affiliated with the Democratic Party and leak information damaging to Hillary Clinton and her campaign for president. The bipartisan panel wrote in the report, which was released yesterday, Tuesday. Moscow's intent was to harm the Clinton campaign, tarnish an expected Clinton presidential administration. Even they didn't think they were going to succeed with this thing. Help the Trump campaign after Trump became the presumptive Republican nominee, but only because he was the Republican nominee, I guess, and undermine the U.S. democratic process. Actually, that's kind of a more deeply troubling thing to sign on for Republicans on the committee than I first thought. I mean, if you dig into it and you parse that sentence a little bit and remind yourself that the Russians approached, the Russian goal here was undermining an expected Clinton presidential administration, which is understandable from the Russian perspective. They are geopolitical rivals, if not necessarily outright enemies, but I'm beginning to think that perhaps we've misunderstood our relationship with them for a long time. But, and so that maybe that's the case. But their aim was to undermine and tarnish an expected Clinton presidential administration because it would have been the American administration. They would undermine any American administration. And you might think, or maybe Trump thought that they wouldn't undermine his because he was so accommodating to them. But they I have to assume that everybody agrees that they very clearly undermined the Trump administration in any way that they could. Chiefly, I think, with an eye toward benefiting themselves. And whenever they benefit themselves, I think the peripheral effect is to undermine the American administration, whoever is running it. But this is very, or should be, I guess, if they had brains in their head. And again, we're talking about the new chairman is Marco Rubio. I'm not certain this is going to sink in with him. What they're saying here is, when Russians need to damage an American administration, they feel like they can reliably turn to the Republican Party to help them do it. I suppose you could you could theorize that they might think the same thing in the opposite way, that if there were a Republican administration, and there is one right now, that they could undermine it by cooperating with the Democratic Party. But we haven't seen that develop. And maybe it just became, maybe it was precluded as a possibility because the Democratic Party was spending, its members were spending its time investigating the nature of the relationship between the Russians and the Americans they sought to manipulate. So maybe they just weren't as soft a target. But maybe it's just something about the makeup, the small c constitution of the two parties that tells us it would be fruitless to approach Democrats about things like this. I don't know, maybe, but it should be deeply troubling to them that they thought the way to undermine America is for us to approach American domestic politics through the conduit of the Republican Party. And that's not just surmise based on what is here in the report. I mean, and of course, the report would provide an awful lot of evidence for it, but it helps us explain why the Russians found it so interesting to be so heavily involved in the activities of the National Rifle Association, for instance. They were very clearly aware. It seems to me like they're pretty, how do we put this? As difficult as they find it to naturally express themselves when posing as Americans, for instance, on social media, to try to manipulate political discourse in America, they give themselves away. They lack their own cultural competency, let's say. That's a good way of connecting things to what Denise was telling us earlier. They lack their own cultural competency for communicating effectively with Americans. But they do know enough about the divisions in American society that they can find fault lines to exploit. And maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's why the affiliation, if you can call it that, that's strong enough to call it an affiliation, the affinity for working with Republicans rather than Democrats, perhaps, is that they said, well, actually is an American party. This will be simpler than we thought, because there's an American major party that's dedicated to the division of American society along any fault lines they can find. And that's the Republican Party. The difficulty with dealing with the Democratic Party is their ideal is unity and the unification, to the extent possible anyway, of American society and bringing people together across their differences. That's the point of the modern Democratic Party. And the opposite is true about what is the point of the modern Republican Party. No wonder they found their affinities there. And from there, it's pretty easy to spot those things, that you would be able to exploit the very particular approach to firearms and guns that Republicans tend to take, as opposed to the way pro-gun, or at least nominally pro-gun, Democrats tend to approach the subject. And there are, simple passwords and codes that you can use in infiltrating the right or activating right-wing response that don't require much in the way of nuance. And since we're, working across cultures here and we don't have the necessary competency, and it may be that the necessary competency doesn't even exist, because quite honestly, a lot of right-wing Republicans aren't working on their cultural competency either. And not just in connecting with Black and Latino communities and other minority communities, but with the rest of America. Even just people who look exactly like them but just think differently, they have difficulty dealing with. But it doesn't take a great deal of study, and maybe that makes it an attractive target, to come to realize I can drive the reactions and drive the politics of a major American political party simply by attaching, doing the right coding and attaching an American flag emoji to what I'm doing. And if I am making fake Twitter profiles, it's very easy to see. What do I need to put in the Twitter profile to explain who is this person, Joe Smith 927658449? Well, he's a father, a Christian. And then you put in the MAGA hashtag and a couple of American Eagle-looking things and some American flags and say, I'm in love with Texas shape, and you're good. You're a bona fide American conservative activist now. And that's all it takes, because that's literally all it ever took for Americans to do this thing. I imagine that must have had, I don't know whether they knew what they were doing or just fell into it. But it seems now, and maybe in hindsight, pretty obvious that they would only come to affiliate themselves effectively with right-wing thought. And maybe it's the fact that they're coming from the same authoritarian mindscape, if you will, or maybe it's just if you want to be a successful right-wing Republican and be accepted as an actual bona fide right-wing Republican activist, it is a simple formula. You really literally need only plug in these stupid words and you're in. Whereas on the Democratic side or the left side or the liberal side or the progressive side or what have you, there's a lot more signaling that needs to go on, and you can find yourself found out and pushed out a lot easier when you screw it up. Even if you're a genuine American left-leaning activist, it can happen. It's not that easy to break in and stay there. All right. I don't know. I think I was here in Bloomberg really just for the headline, but there are so many other stories and headlines that grew out of this that deserve some time. Let's see. The next one up here was Trump from NBC News. Trump says he didn't discuss hacked emails with Roger Stone. That was, of course, in his written answers to Robert Mueller's questions to him. However, a bipartisan Senate report, again, the Republicans approved of this thing, says he did. And why do they say that? Because there's plenty of evidence and, in fact, proof that he did. The report says the Intelligence Committee assessed that Trump discussed hacked emails with Stone, even though Trump told Robert Mueller he didn't recall doing so. So we're in a different, he didn't say he didn't, in which case we would have a problem that we couldn't indict him for. But instead, we have a gray area. Well, I don't recall it, even though, of course, I testify at any opportunity I have that I'm given that I have the greatest memory of all time, et cetera, except for this. My criminal activity I tend to forget. In a 1,000-page bipartisan report released Tuesday, the Senate Intelligence Committee painted a stark portrait of a Trump campaign eager to accept help from a foreign power in 2016, as well as a candidate closely involved in the effort. The Senate report, the most detailed account to date of the Trump campaign's embrace of Russian election interference, also asserted that the allegations that Ukraine interfered in the election, remember that, from the impeachment proceedings, which President Donald Trump perpetuated, originated with Russian intelligence agencies. And that's maybe the most stark example of what's been hinted at with some of the headlines that I brought up and that Greg brought up, and about how ashamed of themselves a normal person would have to be if they were a Republican senator who had participated in this. Not only did they have the evidence before them and know that the evidence existed at the time that they voted not only to acquit, but voted not to request or permit any witnesses who would be able to tell the rest of the Senate, who likely already knew, and the American people who were watching, trying to find out what's going on with my government, what is the truth about what's been happening since 2016. They not only refused to tell them, they refused to let any of the other experts who knew tell them either. I refuse to let you have access to this information, even though I know it's coming out later. And I refuse to act on this information myself. I will not only vote not to allow witnesses, I will vote to acquit, knowing that I will later issue a report that says, I believe now and believed then when I was casting those votes that these things, either that Trump was saying or that his defenders are saying in the trial, are not true. And I will help perpetuate some of those lies myself. How many of the Senator, and maybe if we go back and parse over it, we might we might find that no member of the Intelligence Committee who's a Republican spent any time on air anywhere saying that the real election interference was coming from the Ukrainians and was done in coordination and, in fact, collusion with the Democratic Party to undermine the Trump campaign. Pure projection, everybody assumed at the time. But, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe there are such brazen Republican senators out there who, knowing that they were going to issue and agree with and sign on to a report that says specifically that the idea that it was in fact the Ukrainians and not the Russians interfering in our election, that the fact is that they were interfering on Hillary Clinton's side and not Donald Trump's, and the fact that, for instance, the story that Trump's busy resurrecting right now, every time he has one of his campaign rallies, saying the Democrats were caught red-handed spying on my campaign. All of that started with Russian intelligence agencies. So imagine being a Republican member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, knowing that it was Russian intelligence services generating this fake propaganda, real propaganda, fake news, and that they were doing it to throw investigators, that's you, off the scent, and in fact, not only just throw them off the scent, but cast the blame onto Democrats, to project it onto them, to accuse them of doing what, in fact, your own candidate did. Knowing that you were going to report that and sign on to that report, saying the opposite. No. Ukrainians really did do this thing. No. The Russians really didn't do the other thing. And I, as a result, am going to vote not to bring forward any witnesses and to acquit the president. And then issue the report. I don't really understand it, except for it's just a pure power play. a story that is actually probably totally unrelated, but maybe illustrates something along the same lines. In that I, again, can't understand how you would do this knowing what evidence exists out there. I was totally unaware of this story, by the way. I just missed this because I don't pay attention to basketball, NBA basketball, generally speaking. So I missed this story, but I happened to see somebody retweeting a new chapter in the story of, and if you missed it, you'll be astonished by this too. I guess at the end of the 2019 NBA season, when the Toronto Raptors beat the Golden State Warriors and were crowned champions, the president of the Raptors organization, and I don't have any idea whether I'm badly mispronouncing his name or not, Masai Ujiri, is making his way to the court for the big post-championship celebration and is stopped by security. All the important black people, to the mind of this white security guy, are behind me on the court, and they're dressed in their basketball uniforms. This guy in a suit must just be trying to make his way onto the court because he's just a prankster and wants to be there. And it can't be the case that a black man dressed in the suit is an important part of the organization and deserves to be there. So he's actually stops this guy. Now, it becomes a big controversy, obviously, because, not only does he stop the president of the Raptors from making his way to the court, he shoves him. He pushes him twice. I mean, he just jabs his hands into his chest and thrusts him backwards and says, "You're not going anywhere." Curses at him, "Back the F up," he says to this guy. And the claim is, well, I didn't know who he was and he didn't have credentials. But you can see that he did have his credentials on him. But even so, what makes this story more bizarre, and the reason I'm going to it now, is that originally the security guard ends up filing suit against the president, but against the Raptors as well. And I don't know who he's suing, but he claims that he was injured in this confrontation and became disabled and wasn't able to work. And he, shows up and gives a deposition at his attorney's office in a neck brace, but it's all a lie. It's all a setup. There was some video available earlier. What brought this back into the news was that there's now body cam video available. And before, they had some shaky cell phone video from people who couldn't believe what was going on and filmed the last half of it. There's some surveillance video from inside the arena that they got a hold of that shows the event from afar, but you can't quite tell what's going on here. Here is now, and who's reporting? I've got the tweet of Diamond Leung, the managing editor of The Athletic Biz on Twitter, highlighting what's going on here. Masai Ujiri's legal team has released body camera footage of his encounter with the security worker at Oracle Arena after the Raptors won the NBA championship. And the video is right here. You can see this, I guess, is he an off-duty cop or he's a sheriff's deputy? Maybe he's there in his capacity as sheriff's deputy providing security. And you just got a question, how could you, if you had a body cam on and you knew that you had gotten in the way of this very important, a VIP, and pushed and shoved him for no reason whatsoever, and that it would be on your body cam, how could you go out and file suit and say that you were the one that was assaulted and all this, and this guy had a violent approach, and that he approached you as an aggressor, and where you were knocked to the ground and you were injured and you're suing for all this money, knowing that there's body cam footage that couldn't possibly show anything but what you actually did here. I mean, maybe he thought his body cam was off, that he had turned it off and was covering up the evidence. And I'm sure that Trump people thought that they could cover, and they've done a pretty good job suppressing a lot of the evidence by dangling the prospect of pardons in front of the key witnesses. But I guess it's the same incredible mindset here that just there are some people, and they tend to be white people and orange people, who think the truth doesn't matter. I can tell a lie and give people a totally different picture of this thing, and I can get away with it because it's kind of worked for me for all my life. I don't know how much anything has worked for this sheriff's deputy during his life, but I imagine he's gotten away with things like this in the past and just felt he could do it again. What he was thinking he would get out of this particular encounter, I have no idea. I guess then once he found out, oh, that person that I pushed was a genuine VIP and there's a lot of money behind him and a lot of money behind the organization, maybe I can, maybe my best bet is to totally project and see if I can sue the money out of them and get some sort of a settlement just to make me go away. I mean, it's stupid thinking. Wasn't really going to work, but could that be what's driving the thinking of the Senate Intelligence Committee members, the Republican members? Could it be what's driving the thinking, such as it might be, of Donald Trump? Who knows? Maybe just chaos, maybe nothing more. I don't know. Then we didn't even get to the really salacious stuff, which I guess we'll save for the rest of the week, which is pretty incredible, even as the most salacious stuff goes. So we'll save it for tomorrow. You've likely seen the story, but suffice to say, the P-tape is real, probably, based on this. It doesn't prove the P-tape is real. Only getting the P-tape would prove that the P-tape is real. Although even these days of deep fakes, I suppose even that wouldn't necessarily prove it. But suffice to say, it would be entirely consistent with behavior, Trump's behavior, as described by not necessarily the most trustworthy guy in the world, Michael Cohen. But as it turns out, this would be of a piece of his activity, both as revealed in the Access Hollywood tape, in the Stormy Daniels episode, and everything everybody believes about what he did when Moscow was hosting the Miss Universe pageant as well. We got 2 days left in the week to get into all of that. I'm glad we spent our time with more productive and insightful things. Thanks to Greg and Denise for coming by for that. Time now to stay tuned for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next, right here on Netroots Radio. After this brief announcement, I will pick out the juiciest looking nugget that I can discern in the next few seconds.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, well, he's not going to slack on picking up the news about what happened in the Intelligence Committee report, but he's also got more for you, including, let's see, despite his nomination being nixed, a former oil industry attorney will continue calling the shots at the Bureau of Land Management in an unusual arrangement he set up months ago. No laws for these guys. Stay tuned.